Deputy Darcy.
Thank you, Mr. Sugarman. Probably know I was a member of the banking inquiry. What two German banks did you work for prior to UniCredit?
Before UniCredit, I worked for Landesbank Baden-Württemberg. Before Landesbank-Württemberg, I worked for Hypo Real Estate. Hypo Real Estate was the bank that then took over Deutsche Pfandbriefbank, which is why Germans were landed with a 100 billion bailout and not the people of Ireland. Hypo Real Estate had previously been known as Hypo International, and our previous name, I had worked for the same bank for 5 years, but it was called 3 different names. So I sat at the same desk but worked for 3 different banks. Previously, it was called Bayerische Hupo- und Vereinsbank Ireland, HVB Ireland.
And did you work for those 2 institutions in Dublin?
Yes.
So you had worked for Hypo, which was DEPFA, was that correct?
DEPFA, Deutsche Pfandbriefbank, the biggest bank in Ireland.
At the time. And
there has never been a bigger bank since.
Just, now, if you could jog my memory, please, DEPFA was a German bank.
DEPFA, Deutsche Pfandbriefbank, D-E-P-F-A. Deutsche Pfandbriefbank, it was a Prussian bank, almost 200 years old, that overnight changed domicile and became a fully homegrown Irish bank.
And how long was it fully Irish, wholly owned?
I suggest you check with the central bank who gave it its license.
No, I'm just wondering if you knew. The banking inquiry didn't investigate any of the IFSC companies.
Why?
Because it wasn't part of our remit. We didn't investigate DEPFA.
But you did investigate the conduct of the central bank.
Yes, we did, but we didn't investigate the IFSC institutions.
I understand, but surely liquidity and the adherence to liquidity regulation was looked at by the committee.
Not in relation to the IFSC companies.
So what was the conclusion in relation to all the indigenous Irish banks who then needed a guarantee overnight because they broke liquidity?
And the banks that we did look at were Irish-based, Irish-domiciled banks that were regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
And how many of their risk managers are sitting in Mountjoy?
Well, I assume you should ask the DPP that. That's not a matter for our banking inquiry.
But the letter of the law, Senator, the letter of the law, sorry, Deputy, the letter of the law clearly states that we are facing 5 years in prison. Yeah. So how come, and we know for a fact that all these banks ran dry, otherwise why did you need an overnight blanket guarantee? And yet the toy just broke? Nobody's responsible?
No, but I'm just making the point to you that the German bank, that was the biggest bank that had the biggest crash in the banking crisis. We didn't investigate that, and we didn't investigate.
Although it was an Irish domiciled bank, you didn't investigate it.
That's correct, we didn't. It wasn't part of our remit.
But it was an Irish bank. As Fintan O'Toole wrote, it was the biggest bank in Ireland.
It was overseen by the German
No, it wasn't. It was regulated and registered in Dublin.
But it was the parent bank was Hypo.
Correct.
And on the basis of that, similar to Ulster Bank, similar to other institutions where the parent bank was domiciled.
Which leaves us with AIB, Bank of Ireland, Irish Nationwide. Where are the risk managers of those banks? How come they never submitted a report like I did?
We didn't bring in the risk managers of those institutions because of the constraints of time in the banking inquiry.
Well, perhaps this is why the whistleblower who was in charge of investigating, this is a person you had hired as a committee to do the professional work for you. And this person was in charge of investigating the role of the central bank in the banking crisis. And surely she understood a thing or two of how regulation should work. Yet, this person was told that Jonathon Sugarman cannot be brought in front of the committee. So in that case, how come you didn't ask to see any of the risk managers of Irish Nationwide, of AIB? I mean, this is legislation issued by the Irish Central Bank
Mr.
for
Sugarman.
all banks operating in Dublin.
No, not all of them. We also didn't...
No, I beg your pardon, sir. It states very clearly that this legislation relates to all banks.
If you don't mind, I'm just discussing the role and the fundamentals of which we, as the banking inquiry, tried
Yes,
to operate.
you looked at Irish banks.
We didn't look at them all. And I give you also...
But sorry, may I allow...
No, I'll just expand for your information. The DPP had quite a constraining role in relation to the banking inquiry.
I wonder why.
Well, there were criminal cases coming forward, that was why.
So how many people have been convicted?
Well, that's a matter for the DPP. Can I ask you, Mr. Sugarman...
Because may I just say that in Iceland they've got 25 bankers in jail.
Well,
Deputy Darcy.
Yeah. Yes.
Mr. Sugarman, can I ask, in terms of when you had an interaction with the central bank, at that stage there was a different structure than what's in place today. It was broken between the two sectors, the Financial Regulator's Office, which was run by Mr. Neary. Which section of the central bank were you in contact with?
Well, the way the supervision of the central bank worked, and at the time, as you say, it wasn't called the regulator, it wasn't called the central bank, it was called financial regulator, all right? In the financial regulator, there were teams, and each team was assigned to particular banks. So obviously, I would have dealt with the team that was assigned to us, UniCredit Bank Ireland. I also urge you to look at today's Irish Times that says central bank finds weak controls at some IFSC banks, in which it says that banks must have, the inspectors found problems, including mistakes in the calculation of credit risk-weighted assets, the failure to control weaknesses, and inadequate resources in the regulatory reporting function. This is 10 years later. This is today's Irish Times.
Can I ask Mr. Sugarman, the breach of up to of 20% of liquidity?
Yes.
I'm trying to understand, was it possible for somebody to say no within a financial institution?
What do you mean to say no?
Say that we're beyond our limits and I'm not sanctioning that and we're at 24% of liquidity. Was there any individual could have said stop? Was that...
But of course, my job as risk manager is to see everything, report everything, touch nothing. Yeah. Because if I intervene in terms of I start trading, then there's nobody to control me. Yeah. The only reason I am there is I am there as the eyes of the law. So I am there as the eyes of the regulation. I am there as the eyes of the mandate given to the trading room by the board of directors. So I am there in several capacities to make sure that whether we buy and sell gold, whether we buy and sell German government bonds, this is all within the limit.
So your role is to observe and notify somebody else, is that correct?
My role is to observe and notify everybody.
Okay.
All executives of the bank had to sign off the daily reports every day.
So the risk manager's role in your institution, UniCredit, and any others is not to say no. It's not your role.
No, it's not my position to say no. My position is to make sure that everybody who made these regulations are immediately alerted to the fact that we have broken them.
Okay. And you've done that, you've outlined that. And in terms of your interaction, I just want to go back to the financial regulator. Did you ever meet the senior personnel within financial regulation in Ireland? Patrick Neary was the financial regulator within the central bank. Did you ever meet him?
No.
Who were the people you met?
Oh, I'd love to tell you, but this is my confusion about what happened an hour before the close of business yesterday, because...
Well, I'm asking you. You can tell us. You're under privilege.
I'm allowed?
Yes, you're under privilege.
Am I allowed?
You are.
You can mention.
No, yes,
no, I'm interested. Am I allowed? Am I not allowed?
I'm asking. I'm asking, who did you meet when you reported your information to the financial regulator?
I wait direction. I mean, this is part of my confusion since last...
I think if you give us the title, perhaps, of the organisation that you engaged with, whether it's the central bank...
Well, the central bank. I can give you the date.
You have to take from that, Deputy Darcy, can I ask you to clarify maybe a date and maybe...
Which office within this financial regulator, the central bank, did you meet?
We have to be careful about...
Which office?
I understand.
for your interest. Mr.
I understand. So I have provided the chairman with the information where it states the dates of our meeting and the senior central bank officials that attended those meetings.
Sure, Chairman can make that available to me afterwards. Yes. Sure. Mr. Sugarman, we're a decade down the line in relation to the Irish banking sector and the crisis that happened. You're a senior risk manager.
I used to be.
You used to be.
I need the committee to understand this. I have not been able to work for 10 years.
Okay. I can understand that.
I rely on the kindness of people in Ireland, kindness of people in America, in Greece, in France, in Switzerland, in Germany. That is how I have food to eat and a roof above my head. This is the price I'm paying for obeying Irish law.
Can I ask you, in terms of the structures that you know, your experience and your knowledge would allow you to understand better than most, the current structures within the Irish banking sector, within the Irish banking groups, and within financial regulation currently. Are you satisfied that the structures that are in place today can prevent this disaster occurring again?
Well, let us say, somewhat learned suspicion was that nothing has been learned. This suspicion was confirmed when I saw this headline last night in the Irish Times that says that according to this, there are still, I will find it exactly, there is a problem relating to the accuracy and integrity. And in my resignation 10 years ago, I said I am resigning because of issues of integrity. And here we have the central bank admitting in the Irish Times yesterday that there are still issues of integrity.
And are those issues, to your knowledge?
Sorry, and the failure to control and inadequate resources.
I suppose what I'm trying to scope, Mr. Sugarman, is the potential liability for the Irish state is with Irish banks.
Yes.
The bulk of the IFSC have parent companies that are domiciled elsewhere.
Yes.
And I am breaking it into the Irish banks that lend and trade the lending rest of the country and the IFSC. Are either or are both of them correctly constituted so as this won't happen again?
No.
What are the primary areas where you see they are not correctly constituted?
Well, when I see a headline such as this, saying in which the central bank itself is admitting to weak regulatory reporting and in some cases regulatory breaches, that according to, and this was a secondary headline in this item.
Are there other areas of, based on your knowledge and experience?
Well, this means we still don't know how fast we're going. So we might wake up tomorrow morning and discover we need another blanket guarantee. Because if we still can't calculate, and I believe that online there was further detail to this item in the Irish Times, where it says that some of these calculations are still being done manually. This is incredible. Multi-billion euro banks are doing their calculations of capital and risk-weighted assets basically on the back of a coaster. Because people are feeding in numbers to spreadsheets and saying, right, here's your figure. And this is happening in Dublin today. So what's changed?
Well, that's what I'm asking you.
I don't think anything has changed, and I think that this is confirmation of that.
Can I ask also, Mr. Sugarman, the sector within the Irish financial institutions that did the most damage was the commercial real estate sector, that it had overheated which led to the establishment of NAMA on the Irish banks' loan books, and then subsequently the non-Irish domicile banks. There was also a pretty substantial commercial real estate sector. Have you any knowledge, because it's a question that I put to Philip Lane, the the Governor of the Central Bank of Ireland last week, have you any knowledge, based upon your knowledge, your abilities and your experience, about the commercial real estate sector today, that it may be not balanced in the way it should be?
I wouldn't like to comment on that because I'm not well versed enough in the ins and outs of it. What I could not emphasize more is the fact that let us not forget that, as you say, the entire downfall of the Irish banking system was on account of commercial property real estate. The price tag for that was 65-70 billion for all of these banks put together.
Of the Irish banks.
Of the Irish banks. But yet this one bank operating from the IFSC, this one bank alone has cost 100 billion. So it is incredibly important that people understand the magnitude of business that is carried out every day in the IFSC. And as Fintan O'Toole says, it is by sheer chance that we, the citizens of Ireland, were not footed with a bill for that 100 as well. Because if you look at the anguish of Irish citizens today between hospitals shutting down, water charges, etc., that's only because of the 65 billion. Can you imagine had we been saddled with that 100 billion as well? And that's only for one bank.
In terms of the bank, it's my last question, UniCredit.
Correct.
Was UniCredit that was based in Dublin, was there a transfer of funds from the parent company to UniCredit Dublin, to that section, for it to continue?
That could occur 20 times a day, 100 times a day. The question is, when you make that call, what did you tell your parents about why you needed that money? I could have easily said that Deputy Darcy has just asked us for a loan of 500 million euro. So I don't really have 500, I've only got 350. Can Mummy, Daddy in Milan give me another 150 because this is a really good deal? So the question is, what was said?
And just, I suppose, the final question, Mr. Sugarman. Were UniCredit, the parent company in Milan, or were they far too trusting of what was happening in Dublin?
Sorry?
Were they far too trusting in what was happening in Dublin?
Well, we were a subsidiary of UniCredit Milan. The dynamics between parents and children, parent banks and their subsidiary children banks, I'm sure are unique to each bank on its own, but there are formal legal regulations that govern this. It's not by chance that Deutsche Bank turns up here and says, I'd like to open a bank. Yes, who are you, Deutsche Bank? So there are forms, regulations, procedures for all of this. And those procedures say, and this is, I'm surprised at why Mr. Lenihan responds to David Norris and says, and this is again in my submissions, the central banks fully cooperate with each other. And yet when contacted, the governor, Mr. Draghi himself says, I've never heard of this.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.